Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to update the House ahead of this week's European Council. We are entering the final stages of these negotiations. This is the time for cool, calm heads to prevail, and it is the time for a clear-eyed focus on the few remaining but critical issues that are still to be agreed. Yesterday, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union went to Brussels for further talks with Michel Barnier. There has inevitably been a great deal of inaccurate speculation, so I want to set out clearly for the House the facts as they stand. First, we have made real progress in recent weeks on both the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration on our future relationship. And I want to pay tribute to both negotiating teams for the many, many hours of hard work that have got us to this point. In March, we agreed legal text around the implementation period, citizens' rights and the financial settlement. And we've now made good progress on text concerning the majority of the outstanding issues. Taken together, the shape of a deal across the vast majority of the withdrawal agreement, the terms of our exit, are now clear. We also have broad agreement on the structure and scope of the framework for our future relationship, with progress on issues like security, transport and services. And perhaps most significantly, we have made progress on Northern Ireland, where, Mr. Speaker, the EU have been working with us to respond to the very real concerns we had on their original proposals. Mr. Speaker, let me remind the House why this is so important. Both the UK and the EU share a profound responsibility to ensure the preservation of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, protecting the hard-won peace and stability in Northern Ireland, and ensuring that life continues essentially as it does now. We agree that our future economic partnership should provide for solutions to the unique circumstances in Northern Ireland in the long term. And while we are both committed to ensuring that this future relationship is in place by the end of the implementation period, we accept that there is a chance that there may be a gap between the two. This is what creates the need for a backstop to ensure that if such a temporary gap were ever to arise, there would be no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, or indeed anything that would threaten the integrity of our precious union. So this backstop is intended to be an insurance policy for people of Northern Ireland and Ireland. Previously, the European Union had proposed a backstop that would see Northern Ireland carved off in the EU's customs union and parts of the single market, separated through a border in the Irish Sea from the UK's own internal market. As I've said many times, I could never accept that, no matter how unlikely such a scenario could be. Creating any form of customs border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK would mean a fundamental change in the day-to-day experience for businesses in Northern Ireland, with the potential to affect jobs and investment. We published our proposals on customs in the backstop in June, and after Salzburg I said we would bring forward our own further proposals, and that's what we've done in these negotiations. And the European Union have responded positively by agreeing to explore a UK-wide customs solution to this backstop. But, Mr. Speaker, two problems remain. First, the EU says... First, the EU says there is not time to work out the detail of this UK-wide solution in the next few weeks. So even with the progress we have made, the EU still requires a backstop to the backstop, effectively an insurance policy for the insurance policy. And they want this to be the Northern Ireland-only solution that they had previously proposed. We have been clear that we cannot agree to anything that threatens the integrity of our United Kingdom. And I'm sure the whole House shares the government's view on this. Indeed, the House of Commons set out its view when agreeing unanimously Part 6, Section 55 of the Taxation Cross-Border Trade Act on a single United Kingdom customs territory. This states, quote, "It shall be unlawful for Her Majesty's Government to enter into arrangements under which Northern Ireland forms part of a separate customs territory to Great Britain." So, Mr. Speaker, this message is clear, not just from this government, but from this whole House. Second, Mr. Speaker, I need to be able to look the British people in the eye and say this backstop is a temporary solution. People are rightly concerned that what is only meant to be temporary could become a permanent limbo, with no new relationship between the UK and the EU ever agreed. I'm clear we are not going to be trapped permanently in a single customs territory, unable to do meaningful trade deals. So it must be the case, first, that the backstop should not need to come into force. Second, that if it does, it must be temporary. And third, while I do not believe this will be the case, if the EU were not to cooperate on our future relationship, we must be able to ensure that we cannot be kept in this backstop arrangement indefinitely. I would not expect this House to agree to a deal unless we have the reassurance that the UK as a sovereign nation has this say over our arrangements with the EU. Mr. Speaker, I do not believe the UK and the EU are far apart. We both agree that Article 50 cannot provide the legal basis for a permanent relationship, and we both agree this backstop must be temporary. So we must now work together to give effect to that agreement. Mr. Speaker, so much of these negotiations are necessarily technical, but the reason this all matters is because it affects the future of our country. It affects jobs and livelihoods in every community. It is about what kind of country we are and about our faith in our democracy. Of course, it is frustrating that almost all of the remaining points of disagreement are focused on how we manage a scenario which both sides hope should never come to pass, and which, if it does, will only be temporary. We cannot let this disagreement derail the prospects of a good deal and leave us with the no-deal outcome that no one wants. I continue to believe that a negotiated deal is the best outcome for the UK and for the European Union. I continue to believe that such a deal is achievable, and that is the spirit in which I will continue to work with our European partners, and I commend this statement to the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of the statement. This really is beginning to feel like Groundhog Day. Another nothing has changed moment from this shambles of a government. Almost 2.5 years after the referendum, 18 months since the triggering of Article 50, and less than 6 months to go, and what have we got to show for it? Yesterday we saw another Brexit minister shuttling over to Brussels to come back, tail between his legs, unable to deliver because of divisions in the Conservative Party. And
appealed earlier for calm, and I do so again, and I reiterate what people should know anyway by now, and that is that there will be ample opportunity for everybody who wants to ask a question, not to shriek across the chamber, but to ask a question, to do so. So let's have a bit of hush on both sides of the House. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And over the last 18 months, red line after red line has been surrendered. Even the Prime Minister's much vaunted Chequers plan now appears to be dead in the water. A fact after countless resignations and apparently the threat of even more. Even her own conference speech couldn't bring herself to mention Chequers. The Prime Minister must stop the excuses. There is a Brexit deal that could command the support of Parliament and the country, a Brexit deal that would benefit Britain and allow us to rebuild our communities, regions and our economy and avoid any hard border in Northern Ireland. But that isn't her deal. And as we reach a critical point in this nation's history, we need a Prime Minister who will for once make the right decision and put the country before her party and stand up to the reckless voices on her backbenches and within her cabinet. For too long, this country has been held hostage to those in her party who want to drive through a race-to-the-bottom Brexit deal that lowers lowers rights and standards, sells off our national assets to the lowest bidder. Mr. Speaker, it is clear.
Order, Mr. Heapy. You're normally such a good-natured and laid-back fellow. I don't know what's happened to you. I don't know what you had for breakfast, but tip me off afterwards and I'll make sure to avoid it. We need an atmosphere of calm. Nobody, questioner or anybody answering, namely the Prime Minister, nobody in this chamber will be shouted down. And that's the end of it. It's as simple as that. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that the Prime Minister's failure to stand up to the warring factions of her own side have led to this impasse. Let me remind the Prime Minister and her benches what they signed up to just 10 months ago. And I quote, "In the absence of agreed solutions, the United Kingdom will maintain full alignment with those rules of the internal market and the customs union, which now or in the future support North-South cooperation, the all-island economy and the protection of the 1998 agreement." Does that still stand? Interesting question for the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, what she is now hoping is that she can cobble together a deal that avoids all the big questions as to what our future partnership with the European Union will be. Isn't it the case that the backstop is only necessary because the government won't agree to a new comprehensive customs union with the EU with a say for Britain in future trade deals? And Mr. Speaker, how long is her envisaged temporary deal? 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? More? Britain deserves a bit better than this. The blindfold Brexit they're cooking up is a bridge to nowhere and a dangerous leap in the dark. Let me be clear, the only thing we can trust this government to do is impose more years of austerity on the people of this country. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister wants to present Brexit as a choice between her deal and no deal. This is simply not the case. There is an alternative option, an alternative that can command the support of Parliament and the country. Labour has set out our 6 tests. At times the Prime Minister said she would meet them. Labour's plan, Mr. Speaker, is for Britain and the EU...
Order! I mean, an even better-natured fellow, the Honourable Gentleman for Colchester, normally the embodiment of charm and good grace, very over-excitable. We'll get you in due course, Mr. Quince, don't worry. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Labour's plan is for Britain and the EU to negotiate a permanent customs union to protect jobs and manufacturing. We want a deal that allows us to strengthen rights and working standards so we can avoid a race to the bottom. And we want a deal for all regions and nations and allows us to invest in local infrastructure, local transport and energy markets so we can grow our economy again. Labour will not give the government a blank cheque to go down the reckless path they're set on at the present time. Let me be clear, Mr. Speaker, the choice for this Parliament should never be her deal or no deal. If this government cannot get a good deal for this country, then it has to make way for those who can. The Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, faces a simple... The Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, faces a simple and inescapable choice. Be buffeted this way and that way by the chaos of her own party, or back a deal that can win the support of Parliament and the people of this country.
Prime Minister!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps I could point a few things out to the right honourable gentleman. First of all, he said that the discussion on the backstop was in order to avoid the questions of the future relationship. If he had actually listened to my statement, which in fact he had received an early copy of, he would have seen that I made clear that actually we have made good progress on both the structure and scope of the future relationship, which we've been discussing alongside the withdrawal agreement. He also talks about there being a better deal available. Well, we never hear from the Labour Party exactly what deal it is that they think they want. What we have seen...
Far too much noise. I said a moment ago the Leader of the Opposition must be heard. The Prime Minister must be heard. Prime Minister.
What we have heard from the Labour Party is that at one point they say they want to do really good trade deals around the rest of the world. The next moment they want to tie us into the Brussels trade deals by being part of the customs union. One minute they say they want to respect the vote of the British people in relation to free movement. The next minute they say, well, actually, no, free movement is still on the table. So what we see from the Labour Party is constantly no firm proposals on this particular issue. They also talk about being in a customs union, and can I say to the right honourable gentleman, this is perhaps the sort of detail he may not have recognised, but even if you were to go down the route of the sort of deal that might involve being in a customs union, it would still be necessary to have a backstop in case there was a delay between bringing that in and the end of the implementation period. And certainly on this side of the House, we're very clear about our commitments to the people of Northern Ireland and our commitments to the United Kingdom. And then he said, what have we got to show for all of this that has been undertaken? What we have got to show for it is the vast majority of the withdrawal agreement agreed and significant progress and agreement on the structure and scope of the future relationship. And what we also have to show for it is a government that is determined to deliver on the vote of the British people, unlike an opposition that wants to frustrate the people's vote and frustrate Brexit.
Mr. Ian Duncan Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I